we're continuing our talk about decimal numbers. Today we want to start talking about hundredths. When we talk about decimal numbers, we're going to talk about numbers that are tenths, hundredths, and thousandths for the most part. We can go smaller than that, but they're always going to be in these multiples of 10. The way I like to think about them is that as we're kind of dealing with these decimal numbers that show parts of a whole, that what we really have is like a cake. Now this cake that I'm drawing right now, we see that it's divided into 10 pieces, and if I were to take away this top piece of cake, it means that I have eaten 1/10. Okay, as a fraction, that's 1/10. As a decimal number, we already know that that's 0 decimal 1. Okay. Let's say I take another cake the same size. Get that cake drawn here quickly. But with this cake, instead of dividing it into only 10 slices, I'm going to divide this cake into 100 slices. Now, as I divide my slices, you'll notice very quickly each piece of cake gets much smaller. Now, I have more pieces of cake, but the pieces of cake are smaller. This is what happens with decimal numbers. The further to the right we go from the decimal point, we get smaller. If I give you that one little piece of cake now, we say that that is 1/100th. As a fraction, that's 1/100. As a decimal number, that's 0 decimal 0 1. And as we look at that, we can see that our fractions, or our decimals, get smaller. That as we move to the right of the decimal point, everything starts to get a little bit smaller. If I were looking at writing 1/10 as place value, be my 1 spot, my tenths, well, I've only got the 1 in the tenths place, so 0 decimal 1. Well, when I look at this, though, for my hundredths, here's my ones, here's my tenths. Oh, then over here, further out, is my hundredths. I have no ones, there's no holes to put in. I have no tenths, I only have 1/100th. This would be 0 decimal 0 1. Okay. What I can see from this drawing too is if I were to color in the top line here of my hundredths cake, we see that ten hundredths is the same as 1/10. And if I were to do that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we see we have the same problem we had with the tenths, that I can't put 2 digits in one column, so I have to regroup. And so what I really have is here, 0 ones, 1/10, 0 hundredths. Okay, 0 ones. We had the 1/10 from the regroup. and 0 hundredths. So as we kind of look at hundredths, we're going to be thinking out to that third place, that second place behind the decimal point. So we're thinking ones, tenths get smaller, then hundredths is smaller yet again than tenths. If we take a look at hundredths on a number line, again, we've said that we know they're smaller than tenths. So here would be 0. Here is 1/10. Alright. This in the middle would be 5 hundredths. And then we would have equal spaces here. So this would be 1/100th, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 5 hundredths, 6 hundredths, 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths, and here 9 hundredths. So our number line would go that way. We're counting by hundredths. This is between 0 and 1/10. 10 equal spaces. 10 hundredths equals 1/10. Alright, now let's look at another number line. Alright, so we want to look at another number line. And our number line here is going to go between 0 and 2 hundredths, or 2 tenths rather. And then in the middle we'd have 1/10, which means that there are 100ths in between 0 and each tenth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spaces here. This would be 100ths, 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 5 hundredths, 6 hundredths, 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths, 9 hundredths. Then we get to 1/10. Now why is 1/10 1/10 and not 10 hundredths? Well, it is the same as 10 hundredths. Okay, so now that means we can start counting along between 1/10 and 2 tenths. Well, as we count that, that becomes different too. So we have 10 hundredths starting here at 1/10, 11 hundredths, 12 hundredths, 13 hundredths, 14 hundredths, 15 hundredths, 16 hundredths, 17 hundredths, 18 hundredths, 19 hundredths. So as we look at that, we can see how counting by hundredths is really very similar to counting by ones. We're just counting for parts of a whole in a smaller piece. So now let's take a look. Another number line. This time we want to practice finding out where some things are at on our number line. As far as numbers go. So our number line goes between 3 and 4 tenths and 3 and 6 tenths, and that means that 3 and 5 tenths would be in the middle. Put all of our markings in so we know where everything's at. And we want to find some specific points. I'm going to call this a point. We'll call this one a point we want to find. This one a point. And this one a point. We'll call these points A, B, C, and D. And as I look at where point A is on the number line, it's between 3 and 4/10 and 3 and 5/10. It is 3 spaces over from 3 and 4/10. Well, each one of those spaces is the same as calling it a hundredth, right? Because 3 and 4/10 is the same as saying 3 and 40 hundredths, the same as saying 3 and 5/10 is the same as 3 and 50 hundredths, and 3 and 6/10 is the same as 3 and 60 hundredths. So what that means is that point A is at 3 and 43 hundredths on our number line. Point B is one space to the left of 3 and 5/10. Well, because 3 and 5/10 is the same as 3 and 50 hundredths, that means that point B is at 3 and 49 hundredths on our number line. Point C is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces to the right of 3 and 5/10, which would make it 3 and 54 hundredths. And point D is 2 spaces to the left of 3 and 6/10, or I could count it over 8 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 spaces from 3 and 5/10. Again, looking at that, that's going to make point D 3 and 58 hundredths along our number line.